Warning. This podcast features the truth about owning and operating mobile home parks. The following program is not designed to be sexy. It will not hype you up on MHPs. Rather, this is a raw take on this industry and how you find your own path to success. Welcome to MHP IRL, Mobile Home Parks in Real Life, with your host, Ryan Norris.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce a longtime person in my network, several years, Andy Freeman. Andy Freeman started Enjoy Communities. Andy's been a partner on actively, passively, all of the above 10 mobile home parks, spanning roughly 740 pads. The interesting thing about Andy is Andy went through the same progression I see over and over and over. You get excited about mobile home parks. Wow, sounds like a really great thing. You get started in mobile home parks. Wow, this isn't exactly what I thought it was. And like me, like my story, I was pleasantly surprised at what mobile home parks turned out to be. And Andy's story is very reminiscent of mine and is an incredibly important story to tell. Because again, this hype story of what mobile home parks are, it's not only wrong, in my opinion, fair, but it's actually a really wonderful, beautiful asset class to be in for other not so sexy reasons. So we're going to cover that and more. Andy, dude, welcome.
Ryan, happy to be here, man. Excited.
As always, my guests always outdress me. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can see this. If you're listening in, I got a face for radio. Looking good, looking sharp, looking healthy. So clearly the barrage of value add deals and crazy things hasn't got to you because you look good and healthy and happy, man. Let's start here. So how did you hear about mobile home parks? Maybe not necessarily specifically where, but what was kind of the general gist of where you were at in your life? What appealed to you about the hype story of mobile home parks and kind of what your expectations were at that time?
Yeah, so it started out with podcasts. It seemed things like that's like a lot of people's journey, how it starts. I was living in Newport Beach, California, so a pretty nice area in Southern California. I had a nice condo pretty close to the beach. It was, life looked good. It was good. But I was trading my time for dollars, working my butt off in the car business. And I decided after listening to, Bigger Pocket podcast that I wanted to get into real estate. And so I rented out my home. I moved in with my girlfriend and her mother and decided I was going to save my money, put it to play in real estate. And so I had a longer commute to work, started listening to podcasts. And ultimately, there was a couple of podcasts on mobile home parks that really resonated. And I kind of went down that rabbit hole and started listening to podcasts and decided that's what I wanted to do. So I made that kind of my mission, was to get into mobile home parks.
So one of my college roommates is from that area of California. It is absolutely stunning if you haven't been to the Newport Beach area. I also, I'm a former car salesman. So Andy, you and I've talked about that many times over the years. I remember talking to you back in, I think it was 2019 when we first talked, before you even went full time. And at the time, my general vibe at the time was, my take on you was, you also were kind of bound by the shackles of the auto industry. So for those who haven't sold cars before or been around the auto industry, the one really gripping part of it is, whether you have a fancy dancy college degree or not, if you have the hustle and the people skills, you can make a really good salary, relatively speaking, or at least it used to be. I think it's changing big time now with the supply chain issues and what happened with COVID and now interest rates. But at the time, it was just a wonderful space to be in if you enjoy people and you enjoy selling. And, again, it doesn't matter if you have a didn't even really finish high school, or if you have a master's degree, like anybody can go and sell a car. And for the most part, when you start out, it's really fun and it wears on you though. And I remember kind of bonding with you over that. But the one thing that stood out to me, Andy, is when I hit you with this, because I remember this conversation. I was like, Andy, you can relate to this, man. You sell a car, you get a commission, you get paid, you pay tax on it, and it's done. And that's it. You are only as good as what you did right now. That was yesterday.
Yeah.
And I remember having this conversation with you because I was like, Andy, let me give you some confirmation bias about what you've read and heard. Like, imagine spending all that time trying to sell a car, but then you get paid, and then you get paid, and then you get paid. Oh, by the way, and depending on how you structure your taxes and your this, that, and the other thing, you also don't pay taxes, or at least it's delayed. You're kicking it down the road. So you can take that capital and reinvest it and grow something. And then when you have something special and it's time to pay taxes, it's not nearly as big of a deal. And I still remember there's a little bit of resistance from you because, again, the auto industry, man, it has a way of just like it's like a force field. It's like a gravitational pull. It's so hard to let go of that. And you got over it though. And in a big way, 10 mobile home parks in 3 years that's really, really strong. And not only that, you're making six figures in Newport Beach, for crying out loud. So you heard all of those things. Tell me about how you kind of, like, the story of just getting out of the auto industry in general is something to talk about. How did you bust open your mindset to break free of not only the auto industry, but to push towards full time in the mobile home park space?
Yeah, so everything you said is so accurate. You're almost, I mean, in the car business, you can have a great month, sell 50 cars, but it's 0 to 0. You got to start all over again the next month, and you keep doing that consecutively. Eventually, you're just like, oh, I got to do this all over again. Like, Ryan, you don't have to go out and find 60 plus parks next month. You still have that day in and day out, right? So it's a grind. It's fun in the beginning. It starts to wear on you. And then eventually, like you said, it's hard to get out of the car business. There's guys that, oh, I'm going to go sell solar. Oh, that didn't work. Come back to the business. No one really escapes the car business once you're in. It's tough. You got out. I was able to get out, but it's still, if you don't have a strong mind, it's going to suck you back in because you instantly see the money coming in. It's not for people that like delayed gratification. It's people that want that money now. They spend it because they know they can make it next month. So the prevalent theme in the car industry is not, let's invest in real estate, let's save. I can just make it next month. Let's buy something nice. Let's have a $5,000 apartment and $1,000 car payment. So it really took, it started to wear on me. And I had my father had a little health issue and a scare, and it just hit me at work. Like, I'm here 7 days a week. I'm a top level, it's top 12 in my second year. I won a trip to Hawaii, but I was scared to go on the trip because I didn't want to lose the income. If I go take 5 days off, I just lost, a couple $1,000s. So I couldn't even enjoy the freedom or the money I was earning because if I didn't work, I would have to sacrifice a couple $1,000s. So to answer your question, it took a lot of mental power, partly health scare with my father. I decided I'm not going to slave away at the car dealership and do this anymore. And that's what led me to pursue real estate. And then we'll kind of get into what I thought it was going to be versus what it really has been. But that's kind of the progression of how I got there.
Man, I could not agree more. I remember my first full fiscal year, I was a Honda salesperson and I hit the highest award I could hit, which was Honda Gold. And I remember getting carted up to DC, stayed at a 5-star hotel, and I got to meet everybody else who was rocking and rolling, selling lots and lots of Hondas. And I remember meeting the bigwig regional manager, whatever guy, and he looked at me square in the face. He said, "Congratulations, am I going to see you next year?" Of course, at the time, I was like, "Yes, sir, I'll see you next year." And then I realized it sunk in pretty quickly at that big fancy dancy dinner. I was like, "This is it. This is the top of the mountain." And I was like you, I'm already worried about, well, this is a Saturday. Like, how many cars could I sell here? Usually I sell at least a car on Saturday. Like, if I don't at least sell a car on Saturday, that's a big deal if I'm not selling 2 or 3. So I'm like, all right, there's an opportunity cost here. And I'm like going through the progressions. And I was 24 years old at the time. And I was like, I'm 24. Like, I work every single day. If somebody calls me at 10 p.m., I'm answering the phone. And I'm like, it's the same as you, man. I'm like, dude, this is not sustainable. And for me, it was funny because last night I was talking to someone about this. They're like, oh, how long did you sell cars? And I was like, 4 years. Oh, how was it? First year was exhilarating. I was having a ball.
Yeah.
Second year, it was fun. Third year, I just started hating it. And fourth year was just torture. And like you, I also, found bigger pockets, read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and I went, real estate's the answer. And uh, mobile home parks presented itself. And like you, I also kind of had an expectation. And like you, I also was met with a harsh reality. So let's spend a couple minutes talking about that. What were your expectations and how quickly, I guess, did you start feeling the reality? And what was that reality to you that kind of threw cold water on those expectations?
Yeah. So I didn't think I could fully replace my income, but I thought get a park or two, use the money I had saved, buy a park. It's going to cash flow. I was thinking best case scenario. There's so many expenses we can get into that I didn't even budget for. You don't budget for until you've gone through it. You just, on paper, it looked like I could cash flow buy these parks and I could make $4 or $5 a month and that would be enough and raise lot rents consistently throughout the years and then eventually replace my income. So I thought I could buy a few parks, cash flow, and that would be it. But we haven't even gone in yet to being able to get a loan, maintenance, budgeting for CapEx and all kinds of unforeseen items. So the expectation was buy a mobile home park. It's going to be pretty easy. Podcasts I listened to at that time, I've listened to a lot of your podcasts, almost all of them. You weren't the first person. There's a couple other podcasts out there I'd listened to that made it seem a little bit easier. So those are the ones that if I listened to yours first, maybe I wouldn't even gotten down this path. I don't know. So and I would have got a healthy dose of reality listening to your podcast from the beginning. So I got hyped up via other podcasts and my expectations were, I can 4,000 or 5,000 right out of the gate cash flow every month, pay the bills, have a little extra money and then go from there.
And you're in California. It is really, really insanely hard to buy anything real estate related in California. Anything. And you're on the beach. So you're not exactly really driving distance to much. I guess you could kind of get to Nevada, but boy, that's a haul by car. You're really bound to an airplane. Where were you looking for deals?
Yeah, so California, you don't really have that 5 mile. You can't go 5 miles in any direction. You can only go 5 miles east. And mobile home parks in California, they're super dense, small, old homes, but they're likely land plays. Didn't even make sense. So I never even looked in California. I started in the Midwest, built a database for like the Great Plains and Midwest area, Missouri, Ohio, Indiana. I think a lot of people start with Indiana. They have the easiest way to find the owners. Indiana's published online. So I started, I think, with Indiana, Ohio, Missouri, and the Midwest, mainly.
So one big thing I wanted to talk to you about, which before we even hit record, was a big, it's called cold water, throwing cold water in the excitement. What is it like to live in California and own in the Midwest?
Well, here's the thing. California, everyone says, oh, the weather's so great. I've lived there 30 plus years or had lived there 30 plus years. I'm in the Midwest now for the last couple of years doing mobile home parks. So California is kind of, when I go there, I realize how nice the weather is. And everyone always talks about that. Midwest, not as great of weather. I'm not going to bash it, but it's not California weather. So I was planning to do the same kind of path you would do. And I would plan to find the first park and move to the park and actually live in the park. I just thought I didn't think from the beginning I could do it remotely, even though that's what some of the podcasts tell you. So my plan was actually to move to the mobile home park. Thankfully, I skipped that step. I actually didn't live in the mobile home park. It would have been a major, major challenge, and props to you for doing that. But that was my ultimate plan.
Yeah, listen, what I did was very aggressive. I've met thousands of people over the years who own mobile home parks, and I saw a lane and I took it. I said, this is my exit. I can go and move into a mobile home park and get there faster. So in other words, there's a traffic jam on the highway, and I said, hey, frontage road is open. I'm going to pull off of this exit here, skip this little accidente, and then boom, I'm on the highway. And that's exactly how it played out for me. But that was a major sacrifice I made. And I can count on one hand how many other folks I know that have done something similar. Andrew Keel, who's been on this podcast several times, I've been on his. Friend of mine, Mark Bibas, did that. Several other folks I know, but it's not many that in very short order quit and went full time living in a mobile home park. But I want to spend a little time on here. So you're selling cars, which is a 7-day-a-week job. The phone rings, you got to answer it. And by the way, it's unknown numbers all the time. So there's so many clients in the car industry that you can't realistically save everybody in your cell phone. So you've got a lot of people calling you with these numbers where you don't really know who they are. Now, the good news is you're calling the Midwest. So obviously the first 3 digits are a little different. So, hey, this is maybe a mobile home park related thing calling me back versus a car thing. Man, how did you do it? How did you cold call and deal source mobile home parks while you were on a basically 24/7 on-call job selling cars?
Yeah, so I had a virtual assistant help me a little bit with the cold calling. I built up the database. I would do a lot of calling to myself. And if I got an 816, which is Kansas City area, I'd run up to the roof where they stored the cars on the 3rd level. I'd go and hop inside a truck and just close the door and have it. Those conversations with the sellers they can be an hour. So I'd go missing for an hour sitting inside a car talking to a seller. And that's ultimately how I landed my first deal. I was on the roof of the car dealership, sitting in the truck, talking to the seller. And he was like, I want you to come out. And that was a park in Kansas City, Missouri. So that ultimately was what he said, I want you to come out and then I can sign the contract. So I had to tell my girlfriend, hey, we're going out to Kansas City. She's also working at the dealership as well. So she's got to take time off work and we have to fly out to the Midwest and meet face to face with an owner at a library.
So at a minimum, you are spending time. And for those who haven't worked in the auto industry, it is intense and boring at the same time. I remember my days where I basically would call for at least about an hour in the morning. Then I leave a window open for random people to walk in. And then when it slows down in the mid-afternoon, that's when I would go get cars ready, go get paperwork ready. So that way, and I always would force people to come take delivery of their car outside of the normal rush hour where people just randomly show up and start kicking tires. But the crazy thing about it is it's so intense that because you kill what you eat. So like you have to sell it. Like you get in the dealership and you're like, I literally have to sell a car today or I won't get paid. And the pressure that you put on yourself is insane. It eventually zaps the fun out of selling. At least it did for me. But then there's no guarantee someone's going to walk on the lot. So I would deliberately block off this time. And I don't know if someone's going to show up or not. And most days, no one would show up or someone would beat me to the person because I was, went to the restroom real quick and boom, missed a 2-minute window. But because of that, because you're not selling a car every second of the day, and a lot of times there's not a lot of folks walking in or stuff going on, you can just randomly disappear for an hour and your boss isn't going to say anything. They don't care. You know why? Because you don't get paid to physically be there. So if you're not selling, buddy, that's on you. So circling back to this, though, you have someone who's basically, good conversation with, sounds like it's trending in the right direction. You need to hop on a plane. You need to go and meet this guy face to face, which Eric Lindsay, who just came on the podcast, he mentioned he did something similar. No guarantee that this guy's actually going to even meet you. You show up there to spend all this time and money. You rent a car, you get a hotel room, you take time off work, which, as you mentioned with your trip to Hawaii, is X number of dollars in opportunity cost. Same for your girlfriend who's working in the finance department. That's potentially X amount of dollars not made to go and meet someone. So that alone is money spent and sacrifice. How did that first meeting go? And what, more importantly than how did it go? Obviously you bought the park, but what was your mindset there? What helped you overcome that feeling of loss of income and time for not a guaranteed gain?
Yeah, so it's sort of like the car dealership, because like you said, you have in the car industry, you have that sort of anxiety all the time because you don't know where your next deal is coming from. If you don't sell cars for 2 days, put extra pressure on yourself, and then you're just like trying to make up for it. You're, am I going to make my money this month? And so going out to meet with the seller, like you said, yeah, there's no guarantee he signs the contract. Even if he signs the contract, it's still a long play after that. It's still going to take 90 plus days to close. So that money's not going to, I'm not going to see the money from that park anytime soon. So yeah, the consistent theme is just mentally focusing on the bigger picture, not focusing on the right now, which is, like I mentioned, a lot of the people in the car industry, not to generalize, but they focus on right now,
Yes.
now. And it's hard to see even a month, 2 months ahead, where I'm looking years ahead. And so it's just keeping yourself motivated and focused on the bigger picture. So I went out there, we met in the library. It was an older gentleman in his 70s. He pulls up, he's got a Porsche SUV or something like that. He wants to take us around to the park, show us the park. So just get in the car with, kind of going along with what he says. When I get there, the first reality, or the first surprise, was all the numbers he had told me. We got to the park and said, why is that lot vacant? He's like, well, that home just left. That home. So basically occupancy dropped right in front of my eyes. And going out to your first park, you're more willing to, like, oh, okay, it's okay. Because you really want to buy the park to get into the game. So that's another challenge new people face when they're getting into it. You kind of overlook, or you're so focused on going after what you want that you're going to ignore sometimes red flags.
Yeah, that happens all the time. I backed out of a deal earlier this year where something very similar to that happened. Thank goodness for due diligence. And those listening in, don't forget, I will literally give you my due diligence document for free. So anybody who listens to this podcast know I do that at the end of every episode. But one thing that I want to mention that may not be overly obvious to folks listening in is jumping on an airplane, spending $1,000 plus to go and hang out with someone who may never sign with you, or worse, you show up in all of these figures and numbers and yada, yada, yada. We're overly optimistic and not real, because you show up and you're not even really conducting due diligence and you're spotting things that aren't as they seem. Here's a bunch of red flags. I can just feel the cringe, and all the risk-averse listeners here. Look, when you are selling cars, you are absolutely right. You show up, you spend gas money, you spend money on lunch, you spend your time showing up somewhere where you may not get paid that day. And what that does to you is that beats this idea into your brain that it's not about today. It's about, I'm going to show up every single day. I might sell a car, I might not, but at the end of the month, I'll sell, say the average car salesperson when I was selling between 2010 and 2014 sold something like 12 cars a month. And I averaged about 20 cars a month. So you got to figure, if you sell 20 out of 30 days in the month, so call it 2 out of 3 days, you sell a car, you got to figure you're going to have 10 days a month at a minimum. Well, not necessarily at a minimum, but on average, call it for me, where I spend gas money, time, my cell phone, I paid for myself. I funneled everybody through my cell phone so I could respond faster. Those are all expenditures that go nowhere. But what that did for you, Andy, as it did for me, is it kind of actually forced the long game. So although I agree with you, car sales kind of forces a right now mindset. It also, if you're good at it, which you were, it also gives you a bigger picture. And it helps you build resilience when you hear no, or you hear objections, because you have to get through mostly no's. Because when you include all the people I just randomly talk to, kicking tires, or randomly calling in, just asking for a price, and there's no way hey, I'm calling from California, you're in Charlotte, North Carolina, what's your best price, right? Like, if you include all of those, I did not close 50% of the people I talked to. So in other words, it's like baseball, right? Like, you're mostly going to get out. You're not going to get on base, right? So I just wanted to point that out for everybody. That car sales mindset helped Andy make a big risk, spending over $1,000 and time to meet an old dude who wasn't exactly truthful, but we don't want to say he was directly lying. Let's just say he was optimistic with his information. I know for a fact a lot of you listening in would cringe at that, right? But the one thing that's a little interesting too, Andy, is Ian, my business partner, he told me for years, he's like, dude, you are not like the sales skills you developed in a kind of an immediate point-to-point sale is fundamentally different selling real estate, because it's way more about the relationship and way less about like, oh my gosh, look at these new features. It's got the backup camera. It's got this. Like, oh, doesn't it smell nice? Doesn't it feel nice? Doesn't it hug the road? Right? Like in car sales, you're kind of trying to poke emotions and trying to help people get over their own mental blocks in a moment, because you have 4 hours with them. But it took you months and months and months to for this mobile home park, and that's how it goes. So it's a different sale. So before we really get into that, I want to talk about briefly how you were able to take some skills that you developed in the car industry, how they applied and were a benefit to you, but they also were kind of things that you had to retool within your own game.
Yeah. So selling cars, you're selling a product, which I'm not a salesperson by nature. I went to school for accounting. I'm a numbers person. Sales was kind of foreign to me, but it's about building relationships. It's about listening. It's about answering questions, responding timely. With the mobile home parks, we're not actually, it's similar skills, but we're trying to get them to sell their park to us. So it's opposite, but it's still sales because it's about building relationships. You can't, especially with the mom and pops, you can't be overly aggressive at all. You have to just listen. I mean, you got to listen 80%, 90% to them. You talk 10%, listen, let them tell their story. And a lot of times they want to show you around their park. I've had multiple sellers take us on 30-minute tours through their parks, just driving. So tell us about every single lot. And you have to do that. You have to be respectful and you have to be listen. So it's you're building the trust, you're building a relationship, and it's not going to happen necessarily on the first call, but you cultivate that relationship. And once they have that, feel that bond with you, it's pretty much done at that point. They're going to sell to you. It's just about, and a lot of times they'll be more flexible with financing. If you need extensions on the deal, they'll give you another 30 days because you built that relationship. So it's a relationships game with this car sales, and the same with the mobile home parks when going off market to sellers.
And it's just condensed in the car industry. The negotiation is condensed. The marketing is condensed. It's all condensed because, like I said, someone can come in and buy a car within 4 hours. And it's true. Really, really fun. Yeah. I actually had a dream last night. I was selling cars again. And it's a blast because it's a Wild West. You know, someone shows up and they just want a tire kick, and you convince them to take a test drive. Like, hey man, it doesn't cost anything to take a test drive. You really like this one? Yeah, I'm not buying today. I'm not here to buy today. Didn't say where. Didn't say where. Like, it's really not a big deal. I'm not a typical car salesperson. Like, if you like that, you're here, you have a couple minutes, jump in. You said you wanted to look at the Toyota and the Hyundai and the Nissan anyways. So you're here, you have a couple minutes, you might as well hop in the car. All right, fine. But I'm not buying today, right? Heard you loud and clear. I'll go get the keys. Just need your driver's license. Come on. And they hop in the car and they see it. And hey, man, listen, while you're here, you're trading that car, right? Yes. Great. Like, wouldn't it be smart to walk away knowing roughly what you could get for that and have a rough idea what this car costs? Well, yeah, but I told you I wasn't buying today. Hey, again, I heard you loud and clear. Not a big deal. Can you give me another 10 minutes to really evaluate your trade? Sure. And then you walk it, and then you walk it slowly. You open each door. You feel along the little bumps, and you don't say anything. You just, go across a little bump. Oh yeah, I was in a parking garage and someone like booped it. It's like, it's not a big deal. It's just cosmetic. Right. And so it's a similar process with the mobile home parks, right? It's like walking a trade, and you walk through each lot with them. Oh, that's Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and they're behind on rent, but they're really sweet and they always pay. You're like, okay, like, I thought there was a mobile home right there. Oh yeah, but they moved it. Yeah, it's similar, but it's different, right? And the way it's different is, I just met someone on the lot, tire kicking. I convinced them to take a test drive. I convinced them to look at numbers, and now you're there. And they're like, I still need to go drive the Toyota and the Nissan and the Hyundai, and these numbers look fine, but like, I really need to go, and I really need to get my wife on the phone. And you're like, listen, man, what did you have in mind here? Is this in line, or do we eliminate the Honda now having seen the numbers? Well, look, I was hoping for $200 a month, and you're at $400 a month. So yeah, I think I'm kind of eliminating it here. Plus, you didn't really discount it. That's full MSRP, and I know I can get the best deal. And you're like, listen, I think we both know 200 is not realistic, but if I got really, really close to that, would you buy the car right now? Oh, well, I told you I got to go drive the Nissan. Look, if I could get you a deal that you just couldn't believe that you got, would you do the deal right now? Well, like, okay, well, what's your best price? Hey, listen, no guarantees, man. There is no best price, right? Like, there's, you know, if you're willing to buy right now, I can tell you, I can go and convince everybody around here to give you a deal that doesn't make any sense. Look, it's a slow Tuesday. Well, honestly, if I could get 250 a month all in, I'd probably do it, right? And then you go back and you tell your boss and you come back out, look, we're at 295, dude. Unbelievable. Would you do this right now? And you hard close them and then eventually you sell or you don't. Totally the opposite here. If you went in, you met that mom and pop and you're like, well, you're missing this line, this line. Like, would you do 2 million for your property right now? This is a really good deal, folks. Like, let me tell you, like, my boss, my this, my that, the other thing, like, my banker's going to kill me if he hears I said, I offered you 2 million. Would you do it right now? They would politely decline and lie to your face and be like, oh, let us go think about it. Right. And then they'd never take your call again. Right. It's a different sale, man. It's a different sale.
Yeah.
But and it's fun because it's just taking those skills that you learned, overcoming objections and hard closing and applying it to a slower game, which is real estate. But tell me this. So you convinced them, you sold them on you built the rapport, you had the patience, you overcame the objections, you cold called with your VA for X amount of time, which obviously wasn't, I picked up the phone and I got someone immediately. So it was a patience game. It was applying the skills that you learned in the auto industry here. But now you're under contract. You're out of state around Kansas City, Missouri area. You're in Newport Beach, California. You're far away. How do you conduct due diligence? How do you convince a bank? And again, with the theme of expectation versus reality, Andy, what was it actually like?
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of podcasts say they don't make it sound like it's impossible to get a loan from out of state, or you just got to call every bank. You got to pick up the phone book and call 50 banks, right? So my plan was I thought I could get a loan because I had, at that point, I still had W-2 income. I still had good down payment and such. But I wasn't able, I mean, I made a lot of calls. Due diligence, actually, I requested your due diligence manual. I still have it to this day. I think I might have used that on that deal. Your free due diligence template you offer. So anyone that, like you mentioned, can go get that. I did due diligence. I just, I had a checklist I went through and did that. That part is, I might have missed some steps looking back, but I did a pretty thorough job. When it came to the loan, I wasn't getting many yes, or I wasn't even really getting anyone that even knew about mobile home parks, the banks at that time. And so I had got a loan broker to help me out, and he wasn't able to produce anything either. So it definitely kind of, I thought my dreams were already crushed at that point. I was like, I'm not going to get a loan on this thing. And I didn't even, I had 2 other parks under contract as well. After this one, a couple other sellers had reached out in different states, and I put those under contract. Kind of, I had the whole process start to finish to get the park under contract. It was about a year of cold calling and taking phone calls on the roof to finally get that first one under contract.
Wow.
But then as number 2 and 3 came at kind of the same time based on those efforts I had put forth.
Yeah, it's like throwing a bunch of, like fishing, you throw a bunch of bait in the water and eventually some bite and most don't, but that's okay. And you have patience over a long period of time. One phrase I'm sure you've heard, buyers are liars. That was ubiquitous in the car industry.
Yeah.
And that story I just kind of briefly told, hypothetical story, it must have felt like 9 times out of 10, this individual who's like, oh, I still need to drive the Nissan and this and this. I still need to talk to my wife. Da, da, da. Turns out he's already test driven all of those, and he's been to a couple Honda stores before you, and his trade has been in an accident. So that little boop in the garage actually made it to his Carfax report. So now all of a sudden you're like, okay, so this guy wasn't exactly overly honest with me, but if I call him out on lies, he's never going to buy from me. Right. So you kind of allow these buyers to get away with completely unethical behavior. And I kind of can't blame them. Right. Because a lot of folks don't know how to negotiate, don't know how to buy a car. and they're terrified of getting burned, right? So they go to 5 different other stores. They try their best to get the best price. And they're just, as my managers used to say it, they're waiting for a really talented car salesperson to sell them a car, right? And it's really actually eerily similar in real estate. You find out that folks, they have no debt on these properties. They've had it for decades. This is the only mobile home park they have. And they're not sophisticated real estate folks. They don't know how to sell what they have. And they want to get every penny they can out of it. Why wouldn't you? But they have no idea what they're doing. And a lot of times lying, or let's call it strategic omission of very crucial information, and kind of slick talking and a little bit of kind of buttering you up too. So in other words, building rapport, and they're really selling you while you're selling them, right? It still exists. And you kind of, it's such a weird dynamic, Andy, because in the car industry, you're like, dude, I don't care. Just if you got the credit and the down payment, like sign here and take the car, right? Like, not my problem. That's the finance problem. Of course, your girlfriend's probably like, dude, Andy, stop sending me these leads. And so then she and all the finance folks have to work their heroics to even get the deal bought from the finance company. But here, it's them trying to sell you to a certain degree. And I guess that happens in the auto industry too, right? Like, here's why I should get the best price, not the next guy who walks in, right? And for you and for all of us, you have to also kind of be a little bit of a skeptic at the same time, right? Just like walking a trade, just like pulling the Carfax on a car. If this has been in a hurricane and is a total loss, but it looks fine, it's a salvage vehicle, but it drives all right and it looks all right, but I can't resell this, I can't give you top dollar for your trade, right? Same thing here. I'm like, hey, these numbers are great, but I drove and showed up and 5 homes you said were there are basically just dirt. So like, I got to go and convince a bank to give me a loan, and then an investor to have confidence in me. And you kind of got to be a little bit of a skeptic too. So it's a lot of sales. So just on the sales side, Andy, just on the sales side, there's for those not coming from sales, there's a lot of expectation versus reality alone, just on getting this dang thing under contract to begin with. There's a lot of, dude, this is not nearly as easy as I thought. Literally today, by the way, I saw someone post on our Facebook group, what is stopping you from buying a mobile home park? And in so many words, the response was trying to have sellers not sell stuff for $40,000 a pad, and meanwhile they're calling it value add, right? So in other words, it's a really good deal. It's a really tough deal that there's a lot of upside on it, and $40,000 a unit. And my response to that is, my friend, I got data from when I started where the national average was over 40,000, and now we're in 2022 as of this recording. I'd love to get something for 40,000 a pad. That would be great. So like, you know, expectations versus reality here, it turns out a lot of things aren't as they seem. And by the way, the industry changes. And if you talk to some vets who've been in it for decades, it's gone through a lot of change. So Andy, expectation versus reality, just on getting stuff under contract, took you a year of cold calling. And again, it wasn't, I pick up the phone and I get a reward. It's I pick up the phone, I pick up the phone, I pick up the phone, I wait. A year later, I'm finally buying something. And then it snowballs, right? Then all of a sudden you got your second and third deal, because all of that effort is compounding, and it's hockey stick growth, right? It's flat, and then all of a sudden it really takes off. But expectation versus reality, it's a lot harder, but you were prepared for it because you're in sales. So those not in sales, it's going to be tough just on that alone. And by the way, if you go through brokers, expect to pay a full rip on price. So you can't eliminate that cheaply. Then you put it on your contract, and it turns out you can't go to a bank because the dude's numbers are ridiculous. They do not match reality. Again, is this a nefarious, evil, lying person? No, he's probably a normal guy under a really stressful situation, out of his realm. He's not a professional negotiator. He's not a commercial real estate guy. He doesn't know how to sell what he has, and he doesn't want to go and pay a broker. He wants to go off market, and he's going to pay a price for that. And you, on the other hand, have to pump him up full of sugar, but at the same time also be the Debbie Downer and the due diligence her, and let me tell you why this isn't worth as much as you think you do. Do you still want to do it at this price? Right. And then you have to go and convince a bank, and then you have to convince investors, and then you have to do due diligence from out of state. Let's talk for a minute about, all right, banks are tough to convince, period, especially with wonky information. How do you convince a bank from out of state? How do you convince investors when you have no experience doing this? Let's just talk about the due diligence expectations versus reality, and the pre-closing expectations versus reality from banks, investors, and due diligence.
Yeah, so I mean, it's all tough. All the above is tough. The due diligence part, that's going to require another visit back there, because the first time you're just meeting with him, you're driving around in his car. You're not getting out and measuring lots, and you're not doing anything really as far as due diligence other than putting eyes on the property. So that first trip is not going to be your only trip out there. The bank aspect, the seller, he sends all his due diligence documents, right? They typically will. You ask for tax P&L, they for sure don't have a P&L. You can ask for tax returns. They go, I have them, but it's not going to show the income I told you because X, Y, and Z, right? They're taking cash, sends over the financials, and the park's almost showing a loss, right? So at that point, I can't get a bank loan on my own. And so after trying so hard and using a broker who couldn't get it done, the deal had to come down in price. And I wasn't, based on the relationship, I didn't have the confidence at that time to ask for a substantial price concession, because I think if the deal is going to blow up, they say my price is, say, 800,000. I'm not going any lower. Don't offer a penny less. So I took him at his word. And I mean, it's sales, so he set me up, but he won in that round of negotiation. So I didn't want to retrade him on price. There was really nothing I could do at that point, but try to find someone with more experience or with better banking relations, because what it was going to take was someone who had relationships with a bank who could possibly get a loan based on their experience and not actually the property financials. So that's the avenue I had to pursue, because I wasn't going to be able to get it done on my own, which it didn't sit well with me, because I really thought I could. I had a lot of money saved up. I have good credit. I have all the stuff. I can buy a house, but I can't find a park. I can't buy a park out of state, because a lot of these lenders, they want you to live in the city where the park is. They tell you, hey, fill out an application. You do all that work, and they say, okay, we'll process it, but you have to live here. Once you live here, we'll process your application. I said, I'm not going to move there just to apply for the loan. Can you just tell me if it's? And so it's a lot of that. It's a lot of everyday trying some new avenue, and it's stressful, and it doesn't. And in this instance, I wasn't able to do it on my own.
Me too. I ran into the same thing when I started. See former episodes where I talk about that, but it's true. You don't live in that state, it's really hard to find a lender. And sometimes you have to end up partnering with someone, which we're going to talk to in just a minute. Before we talk partnerships, you did find a way to get this closed, obviously, and several more. Now you own it. You're out of state. You're still in the car industry. What was it like, man? Was it as, hey, I'll just continue selling cars until I have enough cash flow? Or were you effectively working two jobs?
Yeah, at that point, I had to. I was committed to. I was going to just go full time. I was not full time. I was going to just move out there. Or actually, I went out there, going to spend a month. I went on leave from my job. I told him, hey, I'm pursuing. I told him was straight up with what I was doing. I said, I can't do all this at once. I got to the point where I can't do successful due diligence. I can't be actively involved and do the car job. So I had to finally at that point tell them I need 2 months off. They said, hey, do your thing. We'll be there for you if you want to come back. So I went out to the Midwest and just slept in my partner's basement. It was about 15 minutes from the park. Worked with him on it, kind of gathered, soaked up the knowledge. And what ultimately happened was, to this day, I still look back. If I would have bought this park on my own, out of state, or even try to live in the park, I would have been done for. Yeah, it would have been just, there's so many things I did not know. I'm from California. I didn't even know what heat tape was, pipes freezing, broken water lines, tenants running stolen rings out of the park, drugs, crime, everything that I would never have been prepared for, I would have been hit straight on with. And even small things like utility deposits for turning on the electric from a vacant POH, right? They want $3,000 because of the history of the previous tenant. All these unforeseen items that no one, I still have never heard anyone talk about utility deposits or turning on the water and sewer, budgeting for those expenses, those deposits. I've never heard anyone tell me about that stuff. And those things all came up. And every time I saw one of those things pop up, I was like, man, I would have been this. I can't even process in my head how screwed I would have been if I tried to fully tackle this park on my own and just get started, just fully diving in, which I know a few people on your podcast recently, one of the guys over, Ryan Hill or Brett, I forget who you just had on recently, talking about his park in Kansas and having to fly out there. And I mean, it put him through a lot of sleepless nights, and it would have been a lot more sleepless nights for me if I had done that all on my own. Your eyes aren't fully opened until you're in the trenches. So
it could not agree. Could not agree more. I bought a property earlier this year where imagine a park-owned home where someone's not paying their utility bill. Now imagine an owner who wasn't paying their utility bill. And the power company told us we couldn't turn on power unless we had a $10,000 deposit. Refundable, fine. But imagine going and raising all this money, syndicating all this money, having reserves, thinking you're ready to rock, and all of a sudden $10,000 slated for CapEx now needs to go to a deposit just to turn the electrical on. And oh, by the way, we're going to turn it off like tomorrow if you don't fork over this money. That is a real story I experienced. Now, the good news is the people I own that particular property with, we all had the money set aside. It wasn't a big deal. And we convinced, well, I should say my partner convinced the utility company to get with my bank and get a letter of credit. So it all ended up working out. But yeah, that's something people don't talk about. Heat tape. If you're down in the South like me, you're like, why would I ever need heat tape? If you're up in the Midwest, you better have heat tape on everything, and you better double check it works every single year and periodically throughout the winter season. Otherwise, you will get crushed. And it's stuff like that that people don't want to talk about. But another interesting thing you brought up, which I want to pivot now into partnerships. So I'm at the point now, I've bought 68 properties and counting, almost 4,000 units and counting. I've got more under contract. I'm actively growing. I still don't own a single property on my own. I don't. And even my wife is like, dude, why don't we just buy stuff just me and you? And I was like, sweetheart, number one, multiplication of capital. You're always going to multiply it more when you have a promote and you bring on someone. So in other words, we buy a property on our own, we'll 2x our money, or you bring on someone, you hit your promote, it works out, you 4x your money. So in other words, if you have a limited capital stack, as long as you think deals are plentiful, it always makes sense to multiply your stack. Now, if the deals are not plentiful, if you think it's all going to dry up and go away, then it doesn't make sense to bring anyone else on if you have the capital. Or you, like me, didn't have the means to buy stuff on your own anyways, and you had no choice, but it turned out to be the right call because not only are you multiplying your capital, Andy, you're also spreading out your risk, which is what you did. So why don't we talk briefly about finding partners, kind of what you have to sacrifice by bringing on a partnership. And in your case, you didn't have an option, neither did I. But now at my point, I still want partners because I think the reward outweighs the risk and the kind of the cost. But I want to hear it from your perspective. Tell me, like, at what cost is it to bring on a partner? And how did that process go for you? Was it easy? Was it hard? How were those conversations? Just, again, expectations versus reality. How did it actually go for you versus what you thought it would be like?
Yeah, so partnerships they're something you need to talk about up front and kind of lay all expectations out there it's not as easy to find someone partner and the rest is history. I feel like probably majority of partnerships don't necessarily end well. So you have to be strategic with who you partner with. So I sought out a partner basically I was just looking who in Kansas City I partner with to get these deals closed. And like you mentioned, by partnering, it was a good fit. We were able to buy that park, another park, and ultimately 10 more parks over 2019 and 2020. And had I not partnered, and there's a lot of people that are against partnering, they think they're giving up half of whatever, possibly more. But had I not partnered, instead of having 10 plus parks, I might still be trying to get that first park running. I could be in the hole in that first park. Ryan, I'll never forget. It was 2 Valentine's days ago. Frozen pipes. We bought this park, and it was, and 2 years ago, it was the coldest winter Kansas City's ever had. And it was negative 15 degrees. Pipes are freezing up, and we got to go to the park. My partner, one of the maintenance guys, and myself, and it was Valentine's Day, my girlfriend, she didn't get out of the car, but we had to go there, take the salamander heaters, put them on the water lines, try to unfreeze the pipes for the tenants because they're freezing up. I had every layer of clothes on. I can't tell you how cold I was. I've never been so cold. Using the salamander heater to unfreeze the lines, my hands were so cold. I was trying to warm up my hands, and then my hands caught on fire. My gloves melted to my hands. I didn't know how powerful those were, and I'm just like, my girlfriend's in the car. It's Valentine's Day. Nowhere in the book did they tell me this is what I was going to be doing in the mobile home park space. I was like, I would love to be back in the air conditioned dealership at this point. So that was just, looking back, I can laugh on it, but at the time, and when you're just deeply cold and it's late and dark and you feel like the world's against you, it was tough. And then we asked the tenants, they said, oh, it's never happened. They didn't have tape. And the old owner for 20 years owned the park and never had the pipes freeze up in the winter. We'd close in winter time, which I don't recommend doing to new operators. And then that happened. So there's nowhere in the playbook they teach you that. So expectations for reality, once again, I didn't even know what to expect, but I never ever expect that. So that was really a wake up call. And another time where I look back, if that was just me on my own without my partner, I would never even known how to go about that process. I would have been getting the calls and not even know what to do. So yeah, that was not fun.
That is commitment. That is an insane amount of commitment. You really have to love what you're doing. Because by the way, if that's your first park, you're not getting paid too much. And that's brutal, by the way, when you're spending all this time and money and not really getting paid, if you're even getting paid. And I think one thing, by the way, with this economic reset that the Fed is trying to force on us so we can curb inflation, it's going to cause some trouble. As my friend Ryan Smith put it, there's going to be some red in the water soon, meaning some folks who leaned into acquisitions thinking it was going to be easy, or thinking there was still a lot of rent growth, or thinking X, Y, and Z, and now all of a sudden interest rates are double or triple depending on X, Y, and Z. Now all of a sudden that 8-pref you're promising your limited partners, you're buying an 8 cap and your debt is over 6%. Your margin of error is this much. And if you are wrong about something on due diligence, or you are wrong about how much you can increase rent, you don't have a lot of margin for error. And you have to go back to those investors and tell them X, Y, and Z about why they're not getting their pref. And if you can't trade out of that because cap rates have gone up, that's potentially bad news bears for someone. And imagine working like that, having your gloves literally catch on fire and melt to your hands in minus 15 degree weather. And then you can't trade out of that asset and you're not really getting paid. And eventually you do trade out of it years later at a loss or a break even, and you actually don't get paid, or you paid to have that wonderful experience. That time is coming, because what I'm seeing in the marketplace right now is there's still a lot of people who are leaning in hard to really aggressive pricing, because again, they think rents are going up. They think they can achieve an economy of scale. And a lot of people still have access to reasonably cheap capital. And that's not the majority of us. So while transaction volume will slow down, there's also going to be people who are making really risky bets heading into a thick economic fog where we don't know what's going to happen. But the point that I really want to highlight there from you, Andy, is like, dude, your level of commitment. It's Valentine's Day, your girlfriend's in the car, and you're just taking some L's. And you quit a lucrative job in Newport Beach, California, to be out in the middle of the Midwest, freezing temperature on Valentine's Day. And one point I wanted to talk about too with you, is a good transition time, is you brought your girlfriend. She quit a 6-figure job to leave beautiful sunny California to move to the Midwest with you. How did you convince her?
Ryan, yeah, we didn't even talk about that yet. I'm still dealing with that, but yeah, it's tough, Ryan. So I convinced her. She didn't come out right away. I got kind of planted in Kansas City. I bought a house there, and uh, just she said she was willing to do it, and then for her to actually put in her notice at the job, it was tough, and she took some time doing that, and it was challenging. And the problem with kind of going back to what we just talked about, I kind of laid out on paper, say, hey, we're going to cash flow $3,000 or X from this park and such, but that was without factoring in partners. So the part I didn't touch on, when you go partner, yeah, that helps you get the deal done. But if you're partnering with someone and you're also raising money, there's not a lot to go around. So that 3,000 of cash flow you thought, you might actually, you're probably not even getting anything in the first year. The distributions are going to the investors. You're definitely not living off the cash flow. So that's another myth that you hear, is just live off the cash. There's not a lot of cash flow to go around based on a lot of these structures. Everyone, like you said, a lot of people are partnering, a lot of people are raising funds. There's not an endless supply of cash going around. So year one and year two are tough. And that's where the mental fortitude comes in. I'm in year 3, 4 right now, where I've had some deals go full cycle. We've had some refinances, got some money in the account, got some money back, seeing kind of the fruits of our labor, where it's now exciting. We can see how it's going to work. She's more on board now. But at the time, the car dealership, especially during the time that she quit, that's what kind of when the cars were in more demand. Everything was MSRP or higher. 15, 20 grand months as a finance manager. And then to have that go away to zero, it took me, my mindset was there because I was the one that doing the research on mobile home parks. I'm trying to relay that to her. She doesn't have all that. It's tough, Ryan. So to answer your question, it was not easy. I don't necessarily recommend anyone else to do that, because it's a lot of extra pressure you put on yourself. You have to have the right partner. I know you've done an episode on that. You brought your wife on the podcast before. You have to have the right partner, and that's really going to test the relationship. So not every girl is going to do that, and not every partner is going to do that. So it tells you a lot about your relationship, and someone that's willing to do that for you, it kind of might solidify that's the right person for you if they're able to do that, take a big sacrifice. So it's not easy. That was 3 years ago. At this point, we're seeing the fruits of the labor now, and in the future, I can see how it's going to work, but it's not a get rich quick scheme. It's a get rich maybe quicker than some other forms of generating income, but mobile home parks are not a fast path to wealth.
It's not. And as I've touched on in former episodes, there's strength in numbers because there's unexpected CapEx all the time. You do your due diligence and it turns out you move in someone and they're flushing grease down the pipes. You don't find out about it until it's beyond too late. And then boom, you got to replace leach lines or septic tanks, or your well goes out. Or literally yesterday I had a main line rupture. That's the second one in 30 days at 2 separate properties. And it's like your cash flow is deleted. You bring on a partner, you 3-4x your money, which is great when it works, right? When you actually hit your promote and you perform, but it's a smaller piece of the pie. So you put in $1, you get 3, but if you had put in all the dollars, you get all of that cash flow, but you also harbor in all that risk. So it's pros and cons. You really have to spend a lot of time thinking about it. And the cash flow it's never enough. It's never, ever, ever enough. There is no such thing as enough money. One of my close friends is worth closer to $500 million than to $100 million. And I sat him down in his living room and I looked him square in the face and I said, do you feel like you have enough? You're worth X number of hundreds of millions of dollars. You have X amount liquid cash. Do you feel like it's enough? And he looked at me and without even hesitating, he said, no. And this is a guy who 20 years ago was, I don't know, maybe upper middle class at best. So you're talking about someone who's had a pretty good run in his life, but even still, he just catapults himself to the 1% of the 1%. And it's still not enough, and it's never enough. And I'll tell you why it's never enough, because that individual, he's seen a septic tank go out of the middle of nowhere, wastewater go out of the middle of nowhere, a bum exit of a bunch of tenant-owned homes just saying, I don't want to live here anymore, and moving their homes, right? And then you have to go and buy homes and move in homes, and that takes time and opportunity cost. So it's never enough. It is never enough. It will never be enough. And it will take years to get there if you even ever do. And by the way, at some point, if you sell, then that cash flow stops and you pay your tax. So it's it's never enough. It's a constant battle. You have to love it. And I think what you'll kind of echo here, Andy, to wind down this episode is I hope this podcast encourages people to get into this space, but for the right reasons. You mentioned earlier, like, man, if I listened to your podcast, I probably wouldn't have done it. And I want to make sure that we end off with all the reasons why we should get into mobile home parks, but for the right reasons. If you're trying to get rich quick, you're trying to have easy cash flow, like, this is not for you. But if you have a strong why, like you want to help affordable housing like I do, or whatever your why is, that's a real why. That's a good, solid foundation. This is an amazing space to be in. So Andy, I want to end off here. What would you say to those getting started? More specifically, expectations versus reality from this perspective. Why you wanted to get in and why you're glad you did, now seeing what reality is, and what you would say to others who have heard the hype story. Why should they still get in, but from what perspective should they look at to be excited about the space?
Yeah, if you're trying to get into this space, I wanted to get into mobile home parks. Like I said, I wanted to get out of the car dealer, and I wanted to do something. Initially, we all start to do something more passive: apartments, single family housing, mobile home parks. The concept of affordable housing, and once you get into providing affordable housing, and once you start to make a park look better, and you see the reaction from the tenants, it's almost addicting. You want it. I mean, if you're a slumlord, it's not going to have the same impact. But if you're bringing in new homes, and when you see a community start to transform, and then people are telling their friends, and people are driving by asking how they can move into the park or how they can, anything available, and it's where people want to live, you feel like you've done something. Because a lot of times these parks we're buying from mom and pop, they're not fixing anything. So when you take over a park, you get an endless amount of calls for repairs, and because it's all deferred maintenance, 20 years of doing nothing. And when you start to actually do stuff and listen to them, it's a great feeling to see. It's a little draining on the capex, and there's never gonna be, like you said, enough. You don't ever budget enough, it seems like, but it's a great feeling. And so it's not at that, you're not making any money at that point. So you're not, year 1, 2, you might not make anything, but you have to love what you're doing, or you're going to say, why am I'm not making any money, I'm out of here. So you have to be passionate about what you're doing. It's a long game. You have to enjoy it, which is kind of hence where I got enjoy communities. I want to enjoy the parks. I want to enjoy operating the parks. I want the tenants to enjoy being there. And you have to have that relationship, because a lot of times there is a rift between tenants and owners, and it doesn't have to be that way. I know you're actively involved. You speak to your tenants one-on-one. There's not a huge gap between you and them. Right. And that's the way I try to be as well. I mean, too many tenants have my phone number, and I've gotten instances where I wish they hadn't, because of some of the drunk texts you get or some crazy stuff that happens. But I think it's best to know you're a real person. So right. Expectations getting into the space, it's glamorized. It still is to this day glamorized. Get into mobile home parks, passive income, this and that. It's not that. It's a challenge, but it's worthwhile. And Ryan, you do the best job of conveying that to your listeners. Nice. You tell the realities. You put cold water on a lot of the myths, but at the end of the day, you build it back up and you let them know it's still very, very, it's something very enjoyable and something that others should do. But you just got to go in with the right mindset. You got to know what you're getting into. So I'll leave it with just be patient, be committed to the cause. It's not I would say at year 3, you start to, okay, this is working out. I can see how this is going to work. Once you're somewhere like Ryan is, you're going to be, okay, you made the right decision, but at the same time, you're still getting a lot of calls. Something's always coming up. And so it's going to be, it's forever. It's going to be a mental game and being committed to the cause. And once you stop being committed to the cause, it's not going to be enjoyable anymore.
It never ends, and it's never enough. The phone calls never end. They will never end. And the cash flow is never enough. And I love the name of your communities. Now I understand where you got to enjoy communities from. I love that too, Andy. And I want to leave everyone off with one word. And that word is addictive. I literally 2 days ago was with two of my employees. They're both new. They're both in a turnaround situation, and they are running and gunning. They are fighting to get bad people out. They're fighting to resolve issues with code enforcement. They're fighting, obviously, alongside me to get people in, and it's working. And it's going slow but fast. I know that feels kind of like a paradox, but certain things you have to grind out and certain things go fast. And I spent time with them, took them out to dinner, and just asked them, how you guys doing? And their response was, Ryan, when are you going to buy more? We want to grow with you. We're addicted, is quite literally the word they said, because they see the light at the end of the tunnel and they know once they get there, it's going to be boring. So these two employees, total rock stars, think the world of both of them. They're potentially lifers, because as they put it, getting people out who are causing issues, seeing the phone texts and voicemails and calls drop noticeably when bad tenants are gone, when they're harassing people, they're stealing ACs, they're breaking windows, they're selling drugs, then they're gone and it magically gets quiet. They get thank yous that feel like $1 million from good, deserving people trying to raise their kids, trying to work, who need affordable housing. Those thank yous when you welcome someone in who can't find a place to live. And they've done everything right. They have reasonable credit. They've stayed out of trouble. They work, and you provide them with that. It is the thank yous you get are addictive, and turning around troubled properties and restoring them to their former glory is addictive. And so if we're going to come full circle here, if you're drinking the Kool-Aid of the hype story about how this is easy passive money, you find out it's not even close. But you're wired like Andy and myself and Ryan Hill, who you were mentioning earlier, and Andrew Keel, who I mentioned earlier. We're addicted. We're addicted because we love helping others, and we love restoring places to their former glory and giving people an opportunity. What I would say as we wind down today is, it's not what you think it is, but it's addictive to the point where you're in minus 15-degree weather and your gloves are melting to your hands on Valentine's Day after you convinced your girlfriend to leave a $15,000, $20,000 a month job. Andy, thank you for coming on, man. This has been a pleasure having you.
Ryan, awesome. Always awesome talking with someone in the car business. Only someone in the car business will know what it's really like. So always a pleasure talking with you, and look forward to talking to you soon.
Awesome. Thanks again for coming on.
Entrepreneurs make mistakes, but with the overwhelming amount of free information out there, you don't have to be doomed to making those same mistakes. You just have to find a consolidated version of the most important information. What if I told you I'll gift you all of my DD mistakes I've made over the years for free? Just leave me a 5-star review, screenshot the review after it goes live, and email it to me at my website, archimedesgrp.com. Afterwards, join our Facebook group, Mobile Home Park Mastermind. You'll find hundreds of other mobile home park owners sharing ideas, contractors, and deals. It's free to join, and we would absolutely love having you join us.